Welcome to the Microsoft Fast Track Partner Technical Architect Program. This session is going to focus on application lifecycle management. My name is Phil Topinis. I'm a principal program manager in the PowerCat team. Our team helps Microsoft's largest customers be successful in the adoption, governance, and technical architecture behind their Power Platform solutions. In this session, we're going to start from the fundamentals. We're going to talk about what solutions are. So if you're coming in from SharePoint or directly into Power Apps, never fear. You don't have to have that Dynamics background. We're going to start you from what a solution is, what application lifecycle management health is, and then I'm going to talk about how Azure DevOps can make all of these processes simple and automated. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the current gaps in this story and what's coming to fix those. Now, I like to learn by seeing things done, so we're going to do a lot of this with demos. So we're going to talk about building a solution, how to extract even your no-code and low-code Canvas apps and flows into source control, how to automate the solution checker to make sure that it passes before anything goes into test, and then also how to create solutions and deploy to test and prod automatically. So let's start with the fundamentals. Let's talk about solutions. So solutions are packages of all of the components that make up your application. So here in our dev environment here, you can see we've got several components making up. Now when it comes time to deploy this into test, what a lot of organizations will do is it's up to each developer to deploy their work there. And so, developer will look here and says, okay, we got a banana here, and they'll take their banana and they'll install it there. And this, I think that's a sock. They'll put their sock over here and so on, and try to recreate everything they had in dev in test. Now, of course, there's lots of problems with that. One is we're taking up a lot of the developers' time, but also two, it's very difficult to make sure that you've exactly reproduced what you have in dev in test. And so one of the goals of this is to make sure that you have a package, a solution around all of these so that you can move them wholesale into the other environment. So the idea is to make it easy to determine, hey, is it the code that's broken or the environment? Or maybe the environment was already sick. I had one customer where we spent more time fixing their test environment than we did working on the app itself. And it also makes sure that you're not missing a component like that sock, or have a component out of date. Maybe you got a blue sock, right? And it's just not right. So we want to make sure that we can easily create test and production environments that match what the developer saw to make it easy to troubleshoot and make sure that testing and everything goes easy. So why do you care, right? Now, there's a lot of studies that show the financial benefits of having good application lifecycle management to an organization and to a software product. But for you, our goal is to make sure that you spend more time building apps and less time responding to bugs you've already fixed because they're showing up in QA or in test because it hasn't been deployed or been updated recently, or troubleshooting the environments themselves, or integrating changes and trying to replicate what you have in your development environment, or even just deploying apps like I was just describing. So let's talk about what solution files are. So solution files are a grouping of anything that can be in your Power Platform based app. So it could be a Canvas app or a model-driven app, a flow, an entity itself and the columns that make it up, or an option set. And even things like environment variables, data flows, AI models can all be in there. And so the idea is you build a solution file, and it makes it easy to transfer your application and all its configurations from dev to test to prod or to your customer, and manage it in source control. Now, the solution file itself is really just a map back to these components in your system that are then gathered up as that solution is exported. Now, solutions are also managed by publishers. We're going to talk about publishers and why they're important on the next slide. So every solution requires a publisher. Now, when you look in your environment, we'll be looking at one here in a second, you'll see the default solution in there and some ones that came with it. It's important for you to create your own publisher and share that publisher between all of your solutions. This controls a lot of things. One of the things, as the publisher, you can control what can be customized in your application and what can't. It also sets the customizations prefix. If you look along your entities, you'll see some that say MSDYN for the ones that Microsoft ships. You'll be able to set your own prefix for for things that you create in your solution. So let's take an existing app and build a solution on top of it. So here I've got this app here. It's not a solution. It's in my development environment. It's called Click. It's a very sophisticated application. What it does is when I click this button that says click, it tells me what time I clicked it. It's handy, right? So whenever I need to know the time, I can just go into this app and click it. Now to add this into a solution, I come over here into my solutions. I'll click New Solution, give it a name. And I can see the default publishers here. I can create a new one by clicking New Publisher. I've already got the 5-minute Power Platform here. This is the one I'm going to add this to. And click Create. That adds a new solution here, but my solution is empty. So now I can add a new application, a new entity, a new flow. Basically anything I can do in Power Platform I can add in here. And when I add it in this way, it's automatically owned by the solution, gets the right prefix and all that. If I want to add an existing one, I can add an existing Canvas app. There's my Click app. So now I have a solution that has Click in it. I can export this solution and import it into another environment. So let me publish all changes. Click Next, and I'll click Export. Now I can export as managed or unmanaged. We're going to talk about the difference of this in a second here. But usually when I'm going, when it's not in development, I'm going here to my test environment. I want to click Manage. So I'm going to click Export. And we're going to see it download here. Now let's go into the test environment and let's load that up. So we'll move over to my test environment. I'll load up the solution. We can notice in here too, right, the Click is not installed yet. So I'll click Import, find the file that was just downloaded, click Open, and Next. And now this is a simple example. This only contains a single app, but if this had contained multiple flows or other aspects of this application, they would all be coming along with us. And so now when I come in here and I refresh my list of solutions, Click is now installed, contains our app, click Play. And now again, we can see what time it is. So it's just a simple example of how you could take the components, the apps and flows and everything that you've already got built, and you can still add them into a solution, right? This isn't something you have to do from the start. Now, when I exported my Click solution, I had the choice to choose between an unmanaged and a managed solution. This is an important choice, and each type of these solutions has a specific purpose. Unmanaged solutions are for use when you're in development. When you have something in an unmanaged solution and you load it into another environment, those become part of that core environment. Unmanaged solutions can't be deleted. And also the contents of unmanaged solutions can be modified by whoever owns that environment. When you have a managed solution, and managed solutions are what you should use as you move your application to a test environment or to production or give it to a customer. Managed solutions are intact. You can control what customizations people can make on the components of your solution. They can also be removed in their entirety as long as there isn't another solution that has dependencies on them that is using the same components. So as we move forward in the demonstration, as we move our application into test and to prod, we'll be using managed solutions. So let's talk for one moment longer about managed versus unmanaged solutions. So unmanaged solutions are containers of the customization, but they're on the top layer. And we'll talk about layering in a second. So that means effectively that unmanaged changes always appear on top of any other changes that you've got. And these always allow customization to the components. You can't lock these down. And really what they are is they're references to the customization to the components, but they're not really owned by the solution themselves. And so because of that, they can't be deleted. You can't be removed. They can't remove these changes, which is why for a test or a prod environment, you really want to use managed. Because as you can see, a managed is really the complete intact version. It gives you control over what's appearing in that environment. It can't be modified. It can't be customized unless you permit it. And components cannot be added or removed by the end user, by the consumer of that solution. And so it really keeps all the changes intact, and we'll talk about layers in a second here. And it controls the way that the layers merge. One nice thing is now that managed solutions can be deleted as long as there aren't other things depending on it. Or they can be upgraded. If you have, you can then create a patch, which is just the differences between version 1 and version 2, and just ship that patch to your customer, and just the changes will be applied as well. Now that part about solution layering is important, because if you look at your system, you've got the base level common data service here at the bottom. And then as you add solutions on top of that, those customizations, like say if you have the contact entity here, you make it add a field to it here, and another field in this solution, those all add up in the order those solutions are added to what the user sees. And so if solution A and solution B are installed in a different order, the user could see something different because these are applied in this order. So you've got the base, and you have each application changing what was below it. In addition, anything that the user makes outside of a solution, any changes that are made outside of a solution, are unmanaged customizations. And those exist on the top as well. So now we're going to take a solution that we created, even with a Canvas app and flows and low-code things, and we're going to move that into source control. Source control will give us a place where we can keep it, track changes on it, so we'll never lose any of our changes. We'll have one central version of what the application looks like. And so before we get started on that, let me open up my solution here, PowerCats, and just show you kind of what this application looks like. So it's got an environment variable, it's got an entity so that we can store our cats in the common data service. We have a Canvas app and 2 flows. One flow loads the image, which you'll see in a second, and the other one is a flow that when we have a highly rated cat, it sends out an email. So let me just open up the Canvas app so you can get an idea. I'm going to play it here. And what this Canvas app does is it loads up an image of a cat from this cat does not exist. And if you haven't seen this website, what it is these are different websites that generate realistic looking photos, but all based on AI. So it's a fictional cat, but it's a realistic looking one. And they have these ones that this person doesn't exist, which I'll just pull up here. Right, so that's just an AI made up image of a person. It's pretty good. If you haven't seen this site, you're welcome for the hours of your life you just lost exploring it. So here in my Canvas app, what this does is this takes an image that's load from this cat does not exist, gives us a chance to name it, which this one we'll call lazy, and then you can rate it with 1 to 5 stars. That one looks like a little bit of a AI warning. Oh, this one's good. Okay, so this one's fluffy. We'll give it 5 stars. And of course, it's all stored in the common data service, so we also have a gallery here of all of them in our ratings. And then that other flow I mentioned as part of our solution is going to mail us when we have a 5-star cat. It's going to give us a new kittygram. So our goal now is to take this solution and to get this entire solution into source control, right? So we don't want to have this all stuck in an environment. What if someone overwrites or we lose that environment? We want to have one common place for this. And so to do that, we're going to use Azure DevOps. So here in Azure DevOps, I've got a repository. It's empty except for its README. And soon this is going to have the contents of that solution. And we do that using pipelines. And so pipelines are kind of automated jobs, a lot like a flow, where we can then have it run against things in our environment. And so we're going to start by creating a new pipeline. And so we're going to use the classic editor. And it's going to go against our repository, that empty repository where we want our code to go. And we're just going to choose empty job. And I'm going to call this here bootcamp extract solution to source control. Now one change I'm going to make also is I want all these scripts to be able to authenticate as me, so I'm going to allow it to access the auth token. And then let's add our first step. Now the first time you do this, you'll search for Power Platform. It'll take you to the marketplace. And the marketplace, which you saw briefly here, is where you can add in additional add-ins. So by searching the marketplace, you'll find Power Platform, get it free, and then you'll see these same actions that I see. And the first one we're going to add is the Power Platform tool installer. That basically initializes everything so that we can use the next steps. So the first thing we want to do is we want to publish customizations. So just like we publish customizations to make sure that our app is up to date, we're going to have this do it before we get an extract of it. Public customizations needs a few things. One, it needs a service connection. This is a connection into your environment using username and password or service principal. I'm going to create a new one now using username and password. So I'll do a new service connection. This is just going to be a generic one. It needs the URL, and I know the URL of my environment, but you can get it from the settings as well. And then our username, password, and we'll give it a name, and this is how we'll refer to it in here. So I'm going to call this dev2, call this bootcamp video. So now when I come back here, if I refresh my list of service connections, I can see the connection we just made. And that'll allow it to connect into our server and publish customizations. So now let's export our solution. Just like we did when with Click, we clicked Export Solution, we downloaded it. We're going to have Azure DevOps export it for us. And so here again, we'll choose our service connection. We need a solution name. Now our solution name is listed here, PowerCats. And so we could copy that in, but instead we're going to be using that over and over again. So let's use a variable. So I'm going to come over here to variables. I'm going to add a new variable for solution name and put PowerCats in there. And now when we come in here, we can come solution name, and then it'll pull right out of that variable. Now for the solution output file, so there's some folders that are special for Azure DevOps. If we click in variables, we can see predefined variables. This link here is going to tell us about some of these variables. Like one of them is the artifact staging directory. That's where we want to put our downloaded files. And so here in our task, we'll use that build artifact staging directory. And then inside that folder, we're going to use our solution name. And solutions are .zip. So now we have an exported file. Let's run it through Power Platform Checker so we don't get it in test unless it passed the checker. So look for the Power Platform Checker. It needs a connection to, it needs a service principal connection. It's a little different to set up. And it wants the location of our files. And so we'll just paste that from the step above. It's the location of our solution. And we're just running solution checker. And so this way, if it doesn't pass solution checker, this will stop and it'll never get to our source control, right? So this will give us a nice check that we make sure we get good code into our source control. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to unpack the solution. That's going to take that zip file and open it up into its individual components. And so our solution input file here is going to be exactly what we had here. Let's get that right. Our target folder to unpack is going to be from a different pre-built variable, the sources directory. And we want it to be unmanaged, right? We've exported it here as an unmanaged because we didn't click managed. And so we want it to unpack as managed so it recognizes the format. And the last step then is we're going to use a script that will then put this into GitHub for us, or into our repository, our source code repository. So our command line, we'll add this. And then this is in the documents. I'll provide a link to this at the end, but this little script here is provided by the product team. And so now, if we save and queue this and run it, we can watch, once it kicks off, we'll watch each step unfold. Now that it's done, we can come here and we can see Power Platform Checker found 8 medium issues, so no high issues, so it didn't stop. And also we can see that it checked it out into our source control. So if we come back here to our repo, we open up PowerCats, and now we can see all of the elements, including our Canvas app, which is our PowerCat Rater, our entity fee lines, everything that we use to run that app has now been checked into source control. This is going to be our master copy. When we deploy to any other environment, we're going to build a new solution out of here and take it there. So we're always going to make sure we've got known set of code. We're not dependent on what's happened in any one environment or wonder why it worked yesterday and it doesn't today. Coming back to Power Apps, I'm going to move to my test environment. Inside my test environment, we have our Click solution, and everything else is just Power Apps out of the box. So our goal then is to deploy our Catfisher solution here. So we're going to do that here in Azure DevOps using a different pipeline. We're going to use this packed solution pipeline. Let me just show you what this one does. This uses the same steps we did before. It installs the tools. And then instead of unpacking it and putting it in source control, we're packing it, but we're packing it from source control. And then we import it into our build server. We export a managed version from our build server. And then those get stored as solution artifacts. And so that way we'll have a point-in-time version of this solution, both unmanaged and managed, that we can use however we need to. So let's run this one. So now Azure DevOps is installing the Power Platform tools. It's packing the solution from source control, importing it into our build environment, exporting a managed solution. And now reviewing this, we can see the artifacts that were produced here. And we can see now we have a managed and an unmanaged version of our solution. Those came from our build server, and its sole job is to then take the source control files and produce these. So now we're ready to take this managed version and deploy it to our test environment. And to do that, we're going to use a release. A release is a lot like a pipeline, but it can be triggered based upon certain events. So if I edit this release, we can see that this is taking the outcome of those. So it's taking those, the solutions from that pipeline. And we can have it trigger so that whenever that is finished, it automatically deploys to QA. But in our case, we're going to just create a release, and we're going to watch this deploy to QA. And so this has a similar set of steps using those same controls. We can see here it's queued to deploy to QA. And then this release will install the Power Platform tools, import that solution into our test environment, and publish customizations so we're ready to test. So now let's look at what it did. So it installed the tools, it imported the solution, and then it published customization. So now if we come back here to the test environment and refresh our list of solutions, PowerCats is now installed. And because it's a solution, we've got all the components, but because it's managed, we can't edit these directly. However, we can make updates to their configuration, and we'll need to, and that's one of the gaps in the current ALM for the ALM story for Power Platform that I was mentioning earlier. One that'll be fixed in the next, fixed later this year. And so if we look at our kittygram flow, for instance, this is the flow that sends an email when a cat is rated 5 stars. We'll notice that it's turned off. And to fix that, we need to reconnect it. So you can see when we clicked reconnect, it found the reconnection. It found the connections because it already connected them one time. Otherwise, we just click the plus sign and they'll connect. And now it's connected. So we'll save this. We'll come back here, and now we can turn on the kittygram flow. Another change we'll need to make is in the app itself, because the app also has connections to a flow because it's loading an image from that this cat does not exist. And so let's take the application itself and let's edit it. So we can already see the dreaded red X here. In fact, up here we can see where I'm calling the flow that loads the image. That's what's broken here. Connection not configured. So here again, we're falling victim to a connection that doesn't exist. And so if we go to Power Automate, we can reconnect that flow, load image. And now it becomes load image 2. So let's put that code back in there. Call it load image 2. And now it's reconnected. Now load image is also in here. We don't need to reconnect it because it's already been reconnected. We just need to reference what's now called load image 2. And now Catfisher, once we close it and reopen it, now we're back rating cats again. Including with the kittygram flow. Now that process of reconnecting you probably experienced if you've moved your app between environments. That's not really part of using ALM or using a solution, but it is something that makes it difficult to easily move your applications between solutions. That's something that the product team is working on and has a way to remedy, and it's coming later this year, shortly. So finally now, going back to the environment map, we've passed test. It's now time to release from test to prod. And really what we'll do is we'll go by taking those same assets, that exact same solution that was released to test, and we're going to deploy it to prod. Back in Azure DevOps, we'll take this release. It's already gone to QA. Let's click prod, and we'll deploy to prod. Now what this will do is it's going to take that same solution that we sent to QA and send it over to prod. Now in this case, I've also got an approver in line. So here our QA team, I created an Office 365 group. Anyone in that group then has to approve this going to prod. And so until I click approve, it won't go. And so now it's been queued and now it starts. And so that way we have a gateway. Nothing will get to prod until we get the right approver saying that it should. And then once it goes to prod, we'll need to do the same reconnection, but then we'll have the exact same thing that we saw in QA headed over to production. So let's talk about what healthy application lifecycle management looks like. The first thing is to use solutions. Right? Create a publisher, use a common publisher across all of your solutions, and segment them out so that they are not too broad. Right? You want solutions to be relevant to what's contained in it. And even if you're like bringing in an entity in a solution, don't bring in the entire entity. Bring in only the fields that are relevant to what you're building. That'll help reduce your dependencies and make it easier to track the changes in your solution. Deployment should always be managed solutions to test and prod. Anything that isn't in a development environment, that'll make it easier to remove them and clean up and make sure they stay intact and aren't changed. Make sure you know what was deployed. And it should be deployed via an automated process. You see the Power Platform tools for Azure DevOps makes that pretty easy. And once you set them up, then you've always got the same deployment process. It's also going to save your developers time in the process. You also want to make sure that even your no-code and low-code objects are being stored in source control, so you have one version of the truth. Too many times I see people, they have a magic environment, and that's where their app lives. And if something happens to that environment, or someone goes in and changes something, a dependency that they don't understand, they have to go hunt it down. It can cause huge problems. And then finally, developer environments should be, one, disposable. So that means if it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon and your developer environment just goes up in smoke, you shouldn't care. Because you could also create a pipeline that's going to take what you have in source control, create an unmanaged solution, and deploy it to any developer environment for you. And they should also be isolated. Every developer should have their own environment, or maybe even sometimes separate by applications. That will reduce dependencies and make sure that there are fewer things going on in that environment that can cause the application problems or that you have to hunt down. So let's talk about some of the current gaps in Power Platform to really make this easy. And these are things that are currently underway, in fact, coming into preview very shortly. So one is it's difficult to maintain separate connections. So if you have two SQL or two CDS connections, it can be hard to keep them straight because you have to edit them when you load them up. And we saw that also for the second bullet. Flows and apps lose connections. So you've got to add them manually. And what's worse is that creates an unmanaged solution layer on top. And then finally, it's difficult to change input parameters. We have environment variables now, but it can still be tough to parameterize your flows and things so that they update per environment that they go into. So my example was a very simple example of a set of environments, right? Dev, test, prod. And that's just for one application. Now, as you look across your tenant or across your organization, you're going to have multiple environments and multiple applications with similar stages, like dev, test, prod going on. And I wanted to show you just one example of a set of environments. And of course, it always starts with your default environment, right? You'll always have a default environment. And then you might have some simple developer kind of proof of concept environments. And then you've got the enterprise environments here that have dev, test, and prod specific for that environment. And for business units, maybe separate development environments for different projects that go into a shared test environment, which is makes managed solutions all the more important. And then also go into a shared production environment. But an important thing to note on this is as you get more application or more environments, you need to keep track of them. And that's where the Center of Excellence Toolkit can come in handy to give you real metrics and real visibility across your tenant on what's going on in these environments. So you can monitor the environments as they're created, who owns them, who owns the contents, the apps and flows within them, and also filter them out. And so this is a free app that's maintained by the PowerCat team, and it's available at the URL Center of Excellence. You can install it within your tenant, and you'll get access to these types of reports here. And then, of course, if you haven't used Azure DevOps to maintain your processes, explore it. The Power Platform tools are just released in the last week, and this will give the ability then to manage this process, both your pro code and your no code assets in one repository, one source code repository, and then automate the processes of creating solutions, building them, and releasing them in the same way. And it's going to save time in doing that as well. So just a few key takeaways and a few resources to leave you with. Source control is not just for pro devs. Power Platform, Canvas apps, Flow, low code still needs to go into source control so that you have one source of truth for your application. And it will protect you so that you don't lose the changes that you've made. Unmanaged solutions are for development only. Create managed solutions so that they stay intact and they're protected as they move to other environments. Don't wait to automate. It's easier than ever with the Power Platform tools. So those tasks will help you automate core Power Platform functionality like building solutions, unpacking them into source control. And you can then lay the groundwork for this so that as you're building your application, the rest of your testing, user acceptance testing, deployment to prod is much, much easier. A few resources here for you, a link into the build tools so that you can see the documentation for them. There's a hands-on lab that goes through a lot of what I did here today, and so you'll be able to get deeper into it and actually build it out in your own environment easily. There's also some build tools for more complex YAML-based pipelines, not the classic editor that I used here. There's more documentation, follow this path, I'm a developer, package and distribute apps. And then here in the slides I've got a few links into Mark Schweigert on the PowerCat team, and a few other people from the community that have this. And I'll be putting videos of this entire process, building out from end to end on my site here.